That is a very difficult question. It's sort of like asking a French composer to identify what makes music French or what makes music Italian. Now, historically, it would be because of the language the composer speaks. You know, that's what helps to define the sound world and the rhythmic pace of a piece. And certainly that's why I think I write in American English in my operas, and I think that's why they sound American. Because everything is reflective of that. And that is why French opera sounds French, or Italian opera sounds Italian. But we're living in a big salad bowl of cultures in the United States. So what defines American music depends on who's writing it, because you have people from many, many different backgrounds and cultures from all over the world who call themselves American and who write American music. I think it's a really exciting time because of that. Now, I come from a school where I was influenced heavily by Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim. I even dedicated the opera Moby Dick to Stephen Sondheim because of his influence on me. But I am also heavily influenced by the French composers and certainly by the great Italian opera composers and all the pop artists that I grew up listening to, like Barbra Streisand, Carly Simon, Joni Mitchell. You know, that's what's exciting now about American music. There is no one definition. I think it's an authenticity that comes from the cultural background of the person who's the composer, who is embracing everything that they've learned and everything that they've heard and experienced and filtering it through their imagination out to the public. Early on in my life, I really didn't know much about classical music except classical piano. I was a classically trained pianist from a very early age, but I started writing music about 11. And I was emulating the composers that I knew. In addition to the classical piano composers that I knew, I loved movie musicals and the theater. And so Gershwin, Sondheim, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Bernstein, those were huge influences on me as I was growing up. So they are fundamentally in there. And so when I was telling this great American mythological journey of Moby Dick, just these influences sort of naturally came up. I think you can hear them very clearly in my work, Dead Man Walking, my first opera, which includes a lot of jazz and American idioms that are sort of innate to historical American culture. But in Moby Dick, I was looking for a much broader, more vast canvas to work with. And every opera, certainly every composition, I'm looking to create a sound world that is particular to that piece. And I found something that is reflective, I think, not only of Sondheim, Bernstein, Gershwin, all of those composers, and the French composers I love, but somehow Wagner and Philip Glass seem to be represented in there too. This is what I'm told. I don't think that way when I'm composing, I just write. But those are rhythms and sounds and lines that feel very, very comfortable and natural to me. Even though I want to challenge myself, that's innately who I am. So I think it's sort of inescapable. It was the idea of my friend Terrence McNally, the great American playwright, and initially we were going to write it together. We had the opportunity to write a big piece for the Dallas Opera and to open a new opera house, and big challenge, and they wanted something bold. And so he looked at me and said, well, the only thing I'm interested in is Moby Dick. And I just remember, whoa, where did that come from and how are we going to do that? But I saw this twinkle in his eye, and him being a great man of the theater, I knew that it was going to be possible. So I read the book and I realized all the music was there. All the music is in those pages. It is so clear to me. It sings, it's full of sounds and a big sound world. The difficult part would be how to tell that adventure story and that psychological journey in the space of a 3-hour opera. And so the big heavy lifting to me was with the librettist. Terrence McNally had to withdraw for personal reasons early on in the project, and Gene Shear stepped in, my great friend and collaborator, and he did a magnificent job. But it meant reading the book several times, deciding what were the most meaningful places to us, what we both were inspired by, what we could leave out, what we could conflate. And then he set about working on it, and as he was working on it, I suddenly had the idea that instead of starting the book with Call Me Ishmael, let's finish it with Call Me Ishmael. So we're working towards that. In other words, we're watching the creation of this character who experiences this long journey, and in the end, when he's rescued, someone asks him, "What's your name?" and he says, "Call me Ishmael," and he will go on to write the book at some point. That makes it active. That takes away the idea of a narrator looking back all the time. That keeps us moving through time in this way. And that way we could invent things and we can move things because, you know, a writer later on is going to change things also. So we could make our own adventure and journey. And we kept the whole thing on the water the whole time, so capturing that sense of being somewhere between, you know, in this netherworld of floating on top of the water, underneath a limitless sky. You have no idea what's below you, have no idea what's above you. And that just sort of opened up the whole world of the piece to me sonically. So it was a long journey to get there, but it was very exciting and really one of the great experiences of my life. Every day I would get up, go to my studio, and I knew something amazing could happen. Cristian Măcelaru, who was the original assistant conductor on the premiere of Moby Dick. So when I walked into school the first day and met the whole cast, there was Cristi sitting there. So I met him the first day of rehearsals, and he told me at that point 7 years ago that he loved the piece so much that he hoped one day to make an orchestral suite out of it. And here we are 7 years later, and he delivered on his wish and promise to do this. And I virtually had nothing to do with it. It was his idea. It was his project. I gave him permission and carte blanche to do whatever he needed to do with the piece to make it the suite and the arrangement that he wanted. But it really is a product of his, well, I mean, it did start with my imagination, but it really is his imagination and his dream and wish to make it happen. Nothing was newly written, but what he did was he took some things that are purely orchestral and he included them, but then he also took things like arias and big ensembles and he put instruments in instead of voices. Or there's one section where he had a lot of fun with these sliding trombones because the original singer in this one section is a man named Robert Orth. And the language for that piece was he's singing a song about eating whale steaks. And the line is, "I want them tough, rare, and bloody." And when Bob sang it, he went tough, rare, and bloody. Which I knew he would do. That's why I wrote it that way. And Cristi was so amused by that he put it in trombones, doing a lot of slides through that whole section. And then he had Pip, lost at sea, the young cabin boy, 14-year-old cabin boy, lost at sea, wondering where to be. And he took that whole section and he put the part of Pip in the piccolo, even an octave, sometimes 2 octaves higher than what the original sang. And so he used his imagination to make it his own as well. And then he put some things are in order, and then some things are completely out of order, but it made sense to him for the architecture of the piece. You know, it's very hard for me to reimagine the piece. I would have done it completely different. So I'm really glad that Cristi did it and took it on himself to make the suite, because it's a fresh perspective and imagination that I couldn't have brought to it. I love motifs, so there are a lot of rhythmic and melodic motifs that you'll hear throughout the piece. There's a 4-chord phrase that sort of represents this sort of eternal canvas and galaxy that we're in. And you'll hear a theme for Ahab, you'll hear a theme for Starbuck, you'll hear a theme for Pip, you'll hear all these different themes swirling around in the context of these 4 chords that expand and contract, just like floating on the water, up and down, towards the sky, back towards the sea. And so I think I like motifs because they give me a clue as to where I am or what I might be listening to, and they give my ear an anchor in terms of the trajectory of the action. Very exciting to hear it in this incarnation and to feel the world of Moby Dick shrunk down from 3 hours to 20 minutes.